Dr. Robin Sanders. We are live and direct, broadcasting from ICAST News at the United Nations. This is the Out of Africa program, and with us, Ambassador Macharia KAMAU, the permanent representative to the United Nations from the Republic of Kenya. Good morning, Mr. Ambassador.
Good morning to you.
This is an interesting UNGA, the 67th. The focus is peace and conflict resolution. I know that you are the permanent representative to the United Nations from the Republic of Kenya. Can you talk a little bit about the Kenyan message at this UN and what you were looking for, what your government was looking for to come out of this session of the UNGA?
Absolutely. It's good to be here with you. We are here because our president has himself been a great champion of peace in our part of the world. We've always believed, as part of the way Kenya undertakes its international engagement, in being a champion of peace. Mm-hmm. And for Kenya, this issue of peaceful resolution of conflict or situations of tension between nations is something that we hold dear, because it's the way in which we have engaged internationally, it's the way in which we have engaged in our region, it's the way in which we have engaged in our own country. Mm-hmm. So this is a concern and an issue that we think truly reflects the ethos of our nation. And we wanted to hear how this would resonate in an international forum such as we have here at the United Nations.
In terms of sort of the outcomes, we know yesterday we had this historic signing between the two Sudans, the newest nation of the world, Sudan. I served there as a diplomat many, many years ago, and
That's
so
right.
it's the issues there are very near and dear to my heart. And of course, the government in Sudan and the government of Juba signed an accord yesterday. Mm-hmm. And how do you see that going forward? What are some of the expectations you hope to see out of this new effort toward peace in your sub-region?
Well, I think it's a very important breakthrough. Clearly, the steps towards peace in Sudan and South Sudan are not going to be giant steps. I think we have to recognize that these are people who have been in a civil conflict for, almost 50 odd years. That's a long time for a people to be at conflict. I think we should also recognize that, particularly in Southern Sudan, where I too served for a while, mainly in the humanitarian aspects of that work, the disruption, the lack of development clearly puts that country at a huge disadvantage in engaging in these kind of international negotiations. So here we are at a place where we never imagined we would be a short 5 years ago when the countries were still at war. We've seen the peace accord, we've seen the referendum, we've seen the new nation, we've seen very important steps. So occasionally when we have a little slip up, I think the international community has to exercise support and patience, which I think is what it has done, so that these two countries can remain tracked to build the kind of peace and to build and put in place the sort of development efforts that they can enhance, so that their peoples can rise from what in fact in Southern Sudan is a situation of dire poverty to prosperity.
Exactly. Let's stay on the humanitarian theme a little bit. I know, we've worked together when Namibia was transitioning from Southwest Africa to the new Namibian nation. So I know your background in terms of humanitarian and humanitarian relief, and certainly looking at refugee and development areas. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about other challenges in your sub-region. You also have a border with Somalia. And right. I know that is a major international issue for the world today, not only because of the displaced persons and the refugees that impact your country, but also because of the terrorist issues that are there with Al-Shabaab and all that. So can you tell us a little bit from your government's perspective, some of the things that have come out of this UN that will help address those challenges?
Well, while we were here, while the president was here, one of his key tasks was to engage in a mini summit that was to take up the issue of Somalia. Now, we have enjoyed great progress as well in Somalia recently. After what, a generation, 25 odd years of complete anarchy, no government, huge displacement of people, a lot of suffering, a lot of bloodshed, terrorism. We are now seeing a nation that of recent has been able to elect a new president, a new prime minister, put in place a constitution. And like I say, these are the kind of signals that we as the international community, we as regional friends of Somalia, see as very important to keep us engaged and encouraged to help Somalia come out of this dire situation which has kind of held down the country for so long. Clearly, the international community will also have to address the challenge that everybody's facing with the refugees. These are scattered all over the world, but clearly the bulk of them are found in Kenya, Ethiopia, and of course in Djibouti as well. Kenya, of course, has the largest numbers. In one refugee camp alone, which is the largest in the world, we have over 650,000 refugees. That congregation of people now constitute the third largest city in our country. It's a phenomenal situation and challenge to us. And this has been, and remember that refugee camp has been there for years. And the people in that camp have been having to live under what are truly unacceptable conditions for a very long time. So yes, we do have to deal with that situation. We are hoping that because of the successes of the AMISOM, the African mission to Somalia, which is an AU-UN hybrid mission, because of that particular mission, we are hoping that, and the successes that have been achieved by it, to liberate vast areas, particularly in the south central part of Somalia, that the international community will now be willing to help the 600,000, 1 million plus refugees to move back into their home, to reclaim their land and to become part of the rebuilding of Somalia.
What about the security issues in Somalia, Al-Shabaab in particular, and how that impacts your country and the challenges that brings to your government? Clearly with this new mandate out there by Al-Shabaab in terms of really attacking the current government, the brand new government. You had this recent attempt on really the new leader.
Yes, and our foreign minister.
And your foreign minister, exactly, at the same time. And so, what do you want to see come out of the discussions here that also better addresses that issue as well as the refugee and IDP issues you've already talked about?
Well, first of all, we have to consolidate the gains. Without a doubt, Somalia remains fragile. The government remains weak. We have to invest in building the administrative structures that will allow Somalia to rise. There is no modern state without an administrative state structure. We have to put in place collectively as an international community an investment in the security systems, the police, the army, to allow Somalia to be able to take on its own challenges around security and peace building. We have to maintain pressure on the enemy. Clearly, we must never lose sight of the fact that the Al-Shabaab and other factions remain there, even though they have taken a mortal blow from the AMISOM troops. We believe that we are only weeks away, if not days away, from the complete elimination of their strongholds around south central Somalia, which would position us now to be able to hand over to the government. But the government will need a lot of support to be able to take that responsibility, both from an administrative as well as from a security, but also from a humanitarian perspective, because remember that even though there is over 1 million plus refugees outside, there are other millions internally who are being displaced. and they too will
They too
need to be
assistance.
assisted.
Let's turn to domestic issues in Kenya. I know that we work together in Namibia doing a very important transition in Namibia's electoral process. You were with UNICEF, and I was the chief of the U.S. political section there. You have elections coming up next year, March, and your country is still becoming mature in its electoral process, particularly in terms of having not only a free and fair election, but also an election free of violence. And I think the international community, particularly on the subcontinent, is really looking to your leadership in Kenya to see if that transition, that peaceful, free and fair transition in the electoral process can become the order of the day. And so can you talk a little bit about where things are in your electoral maturity?
Absolutely.
And talk a little bit about sort of what's being put in place to dampen down some of those challenges that you've had in the past,
Ambassador? For us in Kenya, we want to reclaim our preeminent position in Africa as the country that champions democracy, that champions free and fair elections. Kenya, since independence, every 5 years has had an election. We have never had a break. I think the only other country on earth, in Africa, that can have the same claim to this success is maybe Senegal. Most of the other countries, at one point or another, had a break, a dictatorship, a massive disruption. So we are proud of our history. Democracy is a messy business.
It's a messy business, I agree with you.
So clearly, it's impossible to have a totally perfect history with perfect transitions. And 2007 was our messy moment. And we have learned a lot from what happened in 2007. And Kenya has transformed itself in ways in which are phenomenally transformative, in the sense that we have transformed not just the constitution, which people tend to focus a lot around, but the legislative structure around how we do business in the country has been transformed. We have transformed the way in which our security systems work around these issues of elections and community strife. We are busy working with the number of commissions that have been put in place, independent commissions, to ensure that hate speech and other challenges that come in a competitive election are kept in check. We have transformed completely our judiciary, created a completely independent judiciary that is now challenged with maintaining and as it were, enacting these legislations and enforcing the laws in our country. Our parliament has taken on a completely independent stance. So the three pillars of government have become truly distinct and empowered. And this is very, very important as we move forward. Having said this, none of us are unaware of the risks that remain in our country as we move forward. And these risks cannot possibly be wished away. They will have to be managed over the next 6 or however many months that we have between now and the election. And this is something that all the government institutions, all the state institutions, all the civil society institutions are very focused on. So Kenya is in a different space and a different place. And we hope that the international community will understand that, as has happened elsewhere in the world when democracies have their little hiccups, that this isn't an opportunity to condemn and to undermine the countries. It is really an opportunity to say they need help to make sure that they get it right. And that's what we want to do.
Just one last question on the elections itself. Just having finished my tenure as ambassador to Nigeria, one of the most important things was voter education. And what are you doing on voter education? You're right, the pillars are really important in terms of the 3 legs or the 4 legs of the democracy stool that have to really be there and be strong and be institutionalized. But what are you doing on voter education? Because voter education is one of those attendant issues that are just so fundamental to people being able to understand and accept election results and really appreciate the electoral process. So what have you added to the mix on voter education?
One of the most amazing things about Kenya is that the community, the country is like a community. Even though you have this very many different ethnic groups and peoples that have come together as a country, as a nation, it has a very unitary, it has always had a very unitary ethos or psychology, if you want. And I say this because this is seen, for example, during the run-up to the referendum for the Constitution. It was an open-ended competition within the country around religious lines, around provinces, around gender, around sexual preferences. All these issues came to the fore. And in that mix, Kenyans were highly exposed to the challenges and the issues of the day that they had to sort of process before they went to the referendum to vote for the Constitution. And yet we had 86% turnout of the eligible voters, which in a country that is a lower middle income country is a pretty phenomenal turnout. And this was across the nation. But this all came out of the fact that we have a completely independent media with multiple channels of communication, from internet to newspapers to television to radio, and these have all become highly sensitized to the issues of getting people to understand the issues of the politics of the day. And Kenyans have become seized of this. And we have seen this, we have now an International Electoral Commission, and it too has been going out there and systematically educating people on these practices. And we also have the NGO community. Kenya is one of the, if not, I suspect, has the highest per capita representation of NGOs anywhere in the world. And these are everywhere. So clearly, we have an opportunity to do great education with the population, and the population is prepared.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You've really given us a complete picture, not only of the challenges in your sub-region and what your expectations are, but certainly you've given us an insight into where Kenya is in terms of its run-up to the elections. And so it's really great seeing you again, great working with you again, and much success at this General Assembly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you.
Again, this is Dr. Robin Sanders. We are live and direct from the 67th UN General Assembly. This is the Out of Africa program on ICAST News. Thank you.